on bringing Canadians together. A couple of years after that, we introduced Bill M103 in the House of Commons to recognize and condemn Islamophobia.
What a lie.
You will remember that there was an
He's a
unfortunate
racist.
level of disagreement and debate over something as obvious as
They
the
never
need to
talk about
condemn
Indigenous
Islamophobia.
lives matter.
And over the past years,
They're too
the work
racist.
that we've done as a government with partners in the community sector and indeed across the country.
His father
We've
was a
gotten to place
racist.
where Canadians all understand that we have to fight
Canadians,
against
not
Islamophobia.
Indigenous.
Even
Huge
as
difference.
we stand against anti-Semitism, even as we stand against the troubling rise in anti-Asian racism, even if we stand against the systemic and perpetual anti-black racism that Canada still struggles with.
See how he danced around the Indigenous question?
To redouble and recommit ourselves every day to the hard
He would
work
never
of
dare
reconciliation,
mention the Indigenous.
particularly given the
He's
very
too
difficult
racist.
news coming out of Cowessess, out of Kamloops, out of former residential schools across the country for so many Indigenous peoples and for so many Canadians to realize what our history is about. So what have we done over the past years to counter Islamophobia? We established an anti-racism secretariat.
They would never put racism and Indigenous in the same sentence.
Agencies and securities,
So careful he is. He's a lawyer. Lawyers lie.
To make sure that we're listing organizations like the Proud Boys and far-right extremists as being on Canada's terrorist list. We've continued to invest in community safety infrastructure for mosques, for synagogues, for churches, so they can install cameras that will keep them safe. We've actually moved forward recently on new legislation to strengthen our justice system, to be able to go after online extremism and counter online harms, including restoring Section 13 to the Human Rights Act. We have taken many steps, but I absolutely agree. A government alone,
the atrocities on the Indigenous people from the residential schools is crimes against humanity, and he would never admit to that. And there's a lawsuit now against the Canadian government, $200 million lawsuit, and he would never mention that either.
But it is on all Canadians.
And this is about the housing program.
Vulnerable communities.
This won't apply to Manitoba because of pallister.
When a kid from the LGBT
and pallister is of a different party. He's a conservative and Trudeau's a liberal. So if pallister gets the money, he will filter it through another company. So we will not get the housing. And there's also 89% of slumlords in Manitoba.
It's up to all of us,
and in Winnipeg,
not just Jewish Canadians, to come out
slumlord
and stand
owners
against that kind of hatred. And yes, the horrible pandemic has created anxieties and stresses.
He's a racist.
I think about domestic violence, where we were telling people to stay home because you need to stay safe. What about those women for whom home is not a safe place? We cannot simply expect that government can pass a piece of legislation and do it all.
They pulled over 2,000 little bodies from the ground.
We have done, and we will continue.
Trudeau doesn't care about that.
We need every Canadian to be standing against hatred and intolerance. From calling out sexist language in the workplace, to pushing back against discrimination in our community, to standing with community members who are fearful because of their religion, because of the way they look. If we want to be the country I know we want to be, we all have to step up.
Trudeau's attitudes and values has nothing to do with reconciliation throughout Canada. Absolutely nothing.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I'm Matt Ingram of CHCH News. I'm wondering, in light of the attack in Ancaster, a number of people in the Muslim community are feeling unsafe. Tackling Islamophobia is certainly going to take time, so I'm wondering, are there some immediate concrete steps you can take today to make people feel safer in their own community?
Nobody in Canada should feel unsafe walking the streets.
That doesn't include Indigenous people.
Going about their business, regardless of what they're wearing or what their skin color is. That's not what Canada should be. Unfortunately, that is the lived reality for far too many Canadians. And in the Muslim community, the anxiety they're feeling just going out to the store wearing a hijab and being fearful is unacceptable in this country. So yes, as a government, we've convened a national summit on Islamophobia later this week, where we're going to talk about deliberate and measured steps that we can take. We've moved forward on countering online harms and
absolutely
giving
disgusting.
more power to the justice system.
I never vote Liberal again.
Working with police officers and agencies to ensure that we're both countering systemic racism within them, but also making sure they're connecting better with communities. There is much we need to do, and I know the National Council of Muslim Canadians have put forward a list of recommendations that we're going to be talking about later this week, and we're going to move forward on. But it is something that if you want to talk about ending racism in our communities,
oh my God,
ending Islamophobia, ending the ignorance and the intolerance, yes, government has a big role to play, and we will always play it.
what a liar.
But ordinary Canadians, from coast to coast,
Canadian government spent 141 years trying to cover up the fact that there are bodies in the ground. They could stand there and lie
unconscious bias,
like a snake.
Against intolerance. There is more we can do to be better allies to one another, because that's what Canada is supposed to be all about.
Oh, you don't even know.
In regards to the reopening of the border, yesterday you said that you'll continue to work with the American government.
Anyhow,
what are they telling you, and are they explaining?
None of this money will come to Manitoba because of Pallister, and Pallister's a conservative. So you'll filter that money through other companies, and it would never go to the housing. Not in Manitoba.
Vaccinated,
got slumlords in Manitoba, slumlord owners.
Florida, over the entire course of this pandemic. The Americans have always had an
Pallister's a
asymmetrical
scumbag.
arrangement with us, where even though we put in a barrier